He opened the pantry door at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday in October 1974. He already knew what was inside. He stood in front of it in his work socks. A box of generic salt with the metal spout bent open, a jar of cheap yellow mustard, a 5-pound paper bag of flour folded down to the bottom and held shut with a thick red rubber band looped 4 times around almost nothing. That was everything. He had stood in this same spot last night, and the night before, and the night before that. The pantry had not changed. The shift at the transmission plant had ended at midnight. He had walked the 11 blocks home in the cold and washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and now he was standing in front of the pantry door because he had not eaten anything since lunch, and the hunger was sharp enough that he could not have slept through it. He had checked the pantry anyway. He did this every night now. By the end of this week, this same pantry door would be empty. He would lie to his son about a sandwich that did not exist. He would do it without breaking eye contact, and he would do it with his oldest boy sitting across the table, watching him do it. He closed the door without taking anything out. He went back to bed and lay on his back staring at the ceiling and waited for the sun to come up. Most of this was never written down, and the people who lived it are almost gone. This channel is documenting what remains. Subscribe if you haven't already. To understand how the pantry got that empty, you have to go back 6 days. To the Friday afternoon the paycheck cleared, and to the supermarket chain that had quietly walked out of the neighborhood 5 months earlier and taken everything with it. Each day was smaller than the one before it. The Friday afternoon the paycheck cleared, the pantry door had been heavy. He had walked the 4 blocks home from the bank with cash in an envelope in his coat pocket and met his wife at the kitchen, and they had walked together to the A&P. Except the A&P had closed in May. So they had walked together to the corner liquor store at the end of the block and spent $38 on what they could find. They had carried the brown paper bags back to the kitchen and unloaded them onto the counter together, the way they always did. His wife had lined the cans up on the pantry shelves with the labels facing forward, the way her mother had taught her. A 3-pound chuck roast wrapped in white butcher paper, a bag of yellow onions and a bag of carrots and a 5-pound bag of russet potatoes, 2 loaves of generic white bread, a pound of generic bologna from the cold case, a jar of yellow mustard, a jar of mayonnaise, 3 cans of generic vegetable soup, a can of Vienna sausages, a tin of carnation evaporated milk, a bag of dry pinto beans, a 5-pound paper bag of flour folded shut at the top with a thick red rubber band, tight and new. The pantry door closed against weight. That was the only time in the week the house felt secure. That night, his wife seared the chuck roast in the heavy pot with onions and carrots and potatoes, and the smell of rendering beef fat filled the kitchen and moved into the hallway and under the doors. The children came out of their rooms and stood in the kitchen waiting for it to be ready. They ate at the table with the lights on. He took a second helping of the potatoes. It was the best they would eat for the next 6 days. He knew that. She knew that. They did not say it out loud, but she also knew something he did not. She had counted the cans on the pantry shelves 3 times that afternoon. The number was different than what she had told him. She had been doing this every Friday for almost a year now. That was Friday. Saturday the roast was gone, but the liquid was not. She stretched what remained by reducing the pot drippings into a heavy gravy thickened with flour from the new bag and poured it over thick slices of generic white bread. The children ate it with their hands. By the time the bowl was empty, there was no meat left in it, only bread and gravy. Saturday was always lighter than Friday because that was the math. She did not eat with them. She had been telling him for 3 days that she had eaten earlier. The bread on Saturday was not what they had eaten on Friday. Nothing else would be either. By Sunday afternoon, the meat was a memory. She took the last of the carrots and the remaining potatoes from the bag in the pantry and mashed them together with a heavy hand of margarine and salt. It was a meal designed to feel like a side dish, but it was the only thing on the plate. They ate it at the table while the television in the living room played the Lions game in the next room. The smell of the margarine and the boiled potatoes hung in the kitchen until midway through the second half. Then it was gone. The flour bag in the pantry was still upright. The rubber band was still tight around the neck, but the shelf next to it was empty. That was the last night the kitchen smelled like food. Monday morning, the illusion of abundance disappeared. His wife opened the pantry door and looked at what was on the shelves and made the calculations she had been making in this kitchen for 12 years. She measured out 2 cups of flour into a bowl. She made a blind gravy from flour and water and salt, and the last scrape of margarine from the tub, toasting the flour in the dry cast iron skillet over medium heat until it darkened and smelled like burnt popcorn, then whisking in tap water until it bubbled and thickened. She poured it over hot biscuits she had baked from the same flour. It was a meal of pure starch. It provided the weight they needed to get through the school day and through his shift. She did not tell him what was in it. He did not ask. She stopped writing in the household ledger that morning. She had been keeping it for 12 years. She closed the cover and put it on the top shelf above the refrigerator and did not open it again that week. By Monday night, his lunch pail held a single fried bologna cup wrapped in wax paper. The slice curled up at the edges in the dry skillet to form a small, shallow, greasy bowl, the rendered fat pooling in the center. He ate it in tiny, meticulous nibbles around the curved edge to make it last the full break. That still worked, as long as he didn't think about Tuesday. Tuesday morning, he walked to the corner liquor store for a loaf of bread. He did not want to go to the liquor store. He wanted to go to the A&P 3 blocks over. But the A&P had been closed since May, and the building was boarded up with plywood over the front windows. He walked the 6 blocks to the liquor store instead. The bread there cost 40% more than it had cost at the A&P. It was 3 days older. He bought it anyway because there was nowhere else. By Wednesday, his wife would stop telling him what was in the pantry. We look at the corner store diets of working-class Detroit in the early 70s and assume these families simply did not know how to shop. But they knew exactly how to shop. The problem was that they had been systematically removed from the economy that would have allowed them to shop correctly. This was called supermarket redlining. As economic recessions deepened and inflation accelerated through the early 70s, the major corporate grocery chains conducted quiet internal analyses of their store locations. They looked at zip codes, they looked at income projections, they looked at which neighborhoods were losing factory jobs and which ones were gaining suburban commuters. And then they made decisions. A&P was closing hundreds of stores across the country in the early 70s, including locations in and around Detroit. Kroger followed. Safeway followed. They closed without announcement. They relocated to the suburbs without apology, leaving the working-class neighborhoods of the city stranded with no affordable food infrastructure. Families were forced to buy expired cans and stale bread at 40% markups from independent corner stores that survived by charging what the market would bear because there was no competition left to hold the price down. The corporations did not raise prices on the working class. They left, and nothing replaced them. The pantry did not empty because he forgot how to provide. It emptied because the grocery store left first. The week outlasted the money. That had always been the case in this house. What had changed was that there was nowhere left to stretch the dollar to. Tuesday night, his wife made watered-down ketchup soup. Hot tap water poured directly into the half-empty Heinz bottle, screwed shut, shaken until the water turned a pale, translucent red, then poured into a ceramic bowl with a sleeve of stale saltines on the side. The hot water and the acidic bite of the vinegar tricked the mind into thinking it was consuming a real hot meal. The crackers dissolved almost immediately. You ate them before they fell apart. When the bowl was empty, she rinsed it immediately so the red stain wouldn't set. She put the ketchup bottle back in the refrigerator door. There was still a thin red film coating the inside of the glass. She left it there. She would need it again. By Wednesday morning, the flour bag in the pantry was folded down to the halfway mark. The rubber band had to be looped 3 times around the neck of the bag to hold it shut. His wife packed the children's school lunches from what was left, 2 slices of generic white bread with a thick yellow coating of mustard between them. Mustard bread, no meat, no cheese. Just the sharp, acidic bite of the mustard to distract the tongue from the dry bread. She wrapped them in wax paper and twisted the ends and put them in the lunch bags without looking at them. The children carried them to school and did not open them at the cafeteria table. They had learned which lunches did not get opened. For dinner Wednesday, she opened a can of generic tamales packed in thin, metallic, high-sodium chili sauce. She mashed the soft, mushy tamales into a rough paste with a fork and stretched the entire can over a massive pot of plain white rice. The spicy metallic sauce coated the rice and turned it a dark orange color. The burn of the cheap chili hit immediately and stayed and forced you to drink glass after glass of cold tap water between bites. The water filled the space the food left behind. By Wednesday night, they were drinking more than eating. After the children were asleep, she opened the pantry door and counted what remained. The flour bag with maybe 2 cups left in it, the salt box with the bent metal spout, the mustard jar that had been half empty since Tuesday morning, half a tin of Vienna sausages on the second shelf, a dusting of pinto beans at the bottom of the cloth bag. Across Detroit that night, in row houses on the south side and east side and west side, working-class wives were doing this exact same count, standing in front of pantries with the same shelves, bearing the same brands of generic salt and generic mustard, and the same 5-pound bags of flour folded down to nothing. Not one of them was unique. All of them were alone. She closed the pantry door and stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hand still on the knob. Then she went to bed. There was nothing left for Thursday. 3 meals away from the empty pantry. Then 2, then 1. Thursday was the floor. He went to work at the plant without breakfast. He told her he had eaten at the shop. He had not. He worked the morning shift on cold tap water from the drinking fountain and the burn of the previous night's chili sauce still in the back of his throat. At lunch, he opened his pail and there was a single sandwich inside. 2 slices of bread folded over a layer of cold pickle brine and a thin smear of mayonnaise. He ate it in 4 bites. He drank 2 cups of coffee from the break room urn. He worked the afternoon on the sandwich and the coffee. At home, she opened the Vienna sausage tin with the pull tab and sliced each soft sausage into 4 paper-thin medallions and arranged them across the children's plates so they covered as much surface area as possible. 7 sausages, 28 medallions. To a child, it looked like a mountain of meat. The gelatinous, heavily salted water the sausages had been packed in, she tipped directly from the can over a torn heel of stale bread for herself. She ate it standing at the counter while the children ate at the table. She had been telling them she wasn't hungry for 3 days now. She took the flour bag from the pantry and shook it. There was almost nothing left. She added a few drops of cold tap water and scraped the sides of the bag with a spoon and made a thin gray paste. She cooked the paste in the cast iron skillet until it was firm enough to lift with a spatula. It had no flavor. It was just a warm weight in the stomach. The children ate it without complaint. They had learned which questions were and were not useful. That evening, when there was nothing left to put on the table, she put the children to bed an hour early. Sleep for dinner. If the children were asleep, they were not hungry. If they were not hungry, they did not ask for things she could not give them. She helped the youngest with his pajama buttons. She tucked the blanket under his chin. She stood in the doorway, listening to him breathe. He came home from the second shift at midnight and washed his hands at the kitchen sink. He opened the refrigerator. Half a can of generic vegetable soup, 3 crackers in a sleeve, the heel of a bread loaf. He took the soup and poured it into a pot and heated it on the stove. He poured it into a bowl and carried it to the table and set it in front of his oldest son, who was 8 and who had woken up because the front door had opened. He went back to the kitchen for the crackers. He set those down too. He sat across the table in his work clothes and watched his son eat. When his son looked up and asked why he wasn't eating, he did not look down at the empty place in front of him. He looked his son directly in the eye. He told him he had picked up a hot sandwich from the lunch truck at the factory. He said the foreman had bought a round for the whole line. He described the sandwich in detail, the roll, the meat, how it was still warm. He lied with perfect absolute conviction, the way a man lies when the truth is not something a child should have to carry. He had been practicing this lie for 3 days. Tonight was the first time he had used it. He drank 2 glasses of cold tap water while his son finished the soup. He soaked the last cracker in the broth at the bottom of the bowl and gave that to his son too. Then he sent his son back to bed. He sat at the kitchen table for a moment after his son was gone. Then he stood up and walked to the pantry. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on Thursday in October 1974. He stood at the pantry door in his work socks with the yellow street lamp light coming through the window. He looked at the empty white shelves. He looked at the jar of mustard and the salt box and the crumpled paper of the flour bag held shut now with a rubber band looped 4 times around almost nothing. He closed the pantry door. The hinges made the same sound they had made 6 hours ago and 6 days ago, and every other time he had closed that door for the last 12 years. He had checked the pantry one more time before he came to the sink. He already knew what was inside. Tomorrow night he would check it again. He went to the kitchen sink and drank 2 glasses of cold tap water until his stomach felt heavy. He stood at the sink for a moment with both hands on the rim. Then he turned off the kitchen tap. The paycheck would clear at 9 the next morning. He would walk the 4 blocks to the bank in the cold and stand in line and wait for the teller to count out $38 and put it in an envelope. He and his wife would walk to the corner liquor store together because the corner liquor store was the only store left, and they would spend most of what was in the envelope. They would carry the brown paper bags back to the kitchen and line the cans up on the pantry shelves with the labels facing forward, and the pantry would look full again. For a while. Most of these stories were never written down, and the people who remember them are disappearing. This channel is documenting what remains. If that matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every video goes deeper.